Illinois suburb that all began when a husband, just simply watching his home security camera in real time, apparently sees his wife pull into their garage.
He could say to him, that's definitely the ex-husband in the picture. So with that kind of evidence, meaning the present husband will say, that's the ex-husband, Mr.
It starts with a notification, a routine alert from a home security camera, something a husband never expects to fear. He opens the live feed, and in that moment, his entire world collapses. On the screen, he sees his wife pull into their garage, safe, familiar, home. Then, seconds later, a man appears, running, chasing, following her inside. The husband watches in real time, powerless, as the unthinkable unfolds. He calls 911, but help is already too late. 41-year-old Ashley Stewart, a mother of 6, is found dead inside her own home. Police say the man seen on that camera was not a stranger. He wasn't a random intruder. He was someone from her past, her ex-husband. What investigators would uncover next paints a chilling picture. One of alleged stalking, waiting, and a violent act that may have been planned long before Ashley ever pulled into her driveway that afternoon. From disturbing camera footage, to frantic police radio calls, to a neighborhood lockdown during a manhunt. This case raises terrifying questions about obsession, surveillance, and how quickly a normal day can turn fatal. This is the story of what police say happened before, during, and after that camera alert, and the evidence that may decide what happens next. The quiet suburb of Oswego, Illinois, was settling into a normal weekday afternoon. Streets were calm, neighbors were at work, kids were still in school, and nothing about January 27th suggested it would become a day the community would never forget. Earlier that day, there had been a small, easily forgettable incident near a neighborhood clubhouse. Someone had called police to report a man behaving oddly, allegedly urinating near the property. An officer responded, documented the situation, noted a brown SUV parked nearby, and moved on. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Just another minor call in a suburban town. No one knew that detail would soon take on a far darker meaning. Sometime after 1 p.m., miles away from his home, Ashley Stewart's husband glanced at his phone. Like many homeowners, he had a security camera system installed, and for reasons still unclear, he opened the live feed. It may have been emotion alert. It may have been instinct. But what he saw next would haunt him forever. On the screen, Ashley's car pulled into the garage. A familiar routine, a moment of normalcy. Then suddenly, a man entered the frame. He was running. The man sprinted toward the garage, directly behind Ashley, disappearing inside moments after she did. The footage didn't show what happened next. It didn't need to. Ashley's husband immediately recognized the man. It was her ex-husband. He called 911 as he watched the scene unfold in real time. Knowing he was too far away to intervene, police were dispatched immediately. Officers rushed toward the home on Valentine Way, sirens cutting through the stillness of the neighborhood. At nearly the same time, a witness reported seeing a man running southbound across Wolf's Crossing, a major road near the subdivision. The man appeared panicked, fleeing on foot, moving fast and without direction. When first responders arrived at the Stewart home, they entered through the front door as instructed. Inside, they found Ashley Stewart unresponsive. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The initial chaos that followed was intense. Police radio traffic captured the urgency, officers requesting perimeter lockdowns, asking county units for help, coordinating road closures, and attempting to piece together whether the suspect was still on foot or had fled in a vehicle. Conflicting reports flooded in. Some said the man was running. Others believed he had access to a brown SUV. A few reports mentioned additional vehicle descriptions, but one detail stood out. The same brown SUV from the earlier clubhouse call. That small forgotten incident suddenly mattered. Drones were deployed, K9 units were brought in to track scent through yards, open fields, and neighborhood streets. Schools nearby were placed on secure status as officers flooded exits, watching every road leading out of the area. The search was both frantic and methodical. Officers fanned out, checking cameras at the clubhouse, scanning nearby intersections, and stopping vehicles that matched the description. The focus narrowed quickly. The suspect wasn't gone. He was still close. Just 27 minutes after the 911 call, police spotted the vehicle. The brown SUV was driving south on Harvey Road, not speeding, not attempting to flee, just moving through traffic. An officer initiated a traffic stop near the intersection of Rance Road and Pioneer Court. The driver pulled over without resistance. Inside the vehicle was 44-year-old Ryan Dodd. He was taken into custody without incident. Police quickly confirmed what Ashley's husband feared from the moment he saw that security footage. Ryan Dodd was Ashley Stewart's ex-husband. At that point, investigators were faced with a chilling timeline. Surveillance footage showed a man matching Dodd's appearance lurking near the Stewart home earlier that day. A neighbor's camera had captured a figure in a dark hoodie and jeans standing near bushes close to the house waiting. Police alleged that Dodd followed Ashley into the garage and attacked her with a knife. 2 days later, the coroner confirmed the cause of death as multiple sharp force injuries. The brutality of the attack stunned the community. Ashley Stewart was a 41-year-old mother of 6. Friends described her as warm, generous, and full of life. Her death left a massive void, not just in her family, but in the neighborhood that had known her as a familiar presence. As investigators worked the scene, they asked residents to check garbage cans, yards, and surrounding areas for anything unusual. The request suggested something critical might still be missing, possibly the weapon used in the attack, or clothing discarded during the suspect's escape. Meanwhile, prosecutors began building their case. Ryan Dodd was charged with first-degree murder, home invasion, armed violence, residential burglary, and aggravated stalking. The charges reflected not just the act itself, but what authorities believe led up to it. Waiting, watching, and following, the aggravated stalking charge raised serious questions. Investigators would now look into whether this attack was spontaneous, or whether it was the culmination of a pattern of behavior that began long before that camera alert. Digital evidence would become central to the case. Security footage, cell phone data, vehicle movement, and potential surveillance from neighbors would all be analyzed to reconstruct Dodd's movements before and after the killing. Every minute mattered. Every image mattered. And yet, despite the arrests and charges, many questions remained unanswered. Why that day? Why that moment? What drove an alleged escalation from stalking to murder? For Ashley's husband, the nightmare began with a notification. For investigators, it became a race to prove intent, premeditation, and responsibility. And for the community, it became a devastating reminder of how quickly violence can shatter even the quietest neighborhoods. As the initial shock settled, investigators began doing what they always do after a violent crime, slowing everything down and rebuilding the day minute by minute. The focus shifted from the frantic manhunt to the quieter, more methodical work of evidence, motive, and intent. The first critical question was whether this killing was impulsive or planned. That question immediately pointed investigators back to the surveillance image captured earlier that day. A neighbor's camera showed a man wearing a dark hoodie and jeans standing near the bushes outside the Stewart home, hours before Ashley arrived. Police alleged that man was Ryan Dodd. The image was grainy, but the posture, clothing, and location were enough to raise serious concern. According to authorities, this wasn't a slight encounter. It looked like waiting. Waiting is important in criminal cases. Waiting suggests thought. Waiting suggests opportunity. Waiting suggests premeditation. Detectives also revisited the earlier call near the clubhouse. The same brown SUV connected to that minor incident had been logged hours before the murder, parked within walking distance of Ashley's home. At the time, no one had reason to suspect anything more than a nuisance complaint. In hindsight, it placed the suspect in the area long before the attack. That detail would later become a cornerstone of the aggravated stalking charge. Prosecutors would argue that Dodd didn't simply show up when Ashley arrived home. They would argue he positioned himself nearby, monitored the area, and waited for the moment she was alone. Digital evidence became the next major layer. Investigators began canvassing the neighborhood for additional cameras, doorbells, garages, backyard systems, and street-facing security feeds. In modern suburban neighborhoods, someone is almost always recording. Each camera offered a fragment of the timeline: a vehicle passing, a figure walking, a shadow moving across a driveway. At the same time, law enforcement began extracting data from Ryan Dodd's vehicle and electronic devices. Newer vehicles often store location history, door access logs, and movement data. Cell phones provide even more: GPS pings, Wi-Fi connections, app activity, and timestamps that can place a person within feet of a specific location. Even silence can be evidence. If a phone stops moving during a critical window, investigators ask why. If location services are disabled, prosecutors ask when. If messages are deleted, they ask what was said. All of that data takes time to process, which is why early court filings often feel incomplete. Behind the scenes, analysts reconstruct movement patterns that jurors may one day see reduced to simple maps and timelines. The physical evidence told a grim story as well. The coroner's report confirmed Ashley Stewart died from multiple sharp force injuries. The violence was personal, close range, and fast. This was not a distant or accidental act. Prosecutors would likely emphasize that the nature of the wounds suggested rage, intent, or both. Yet one key piece appeared missing: the weapon. Police asking residents to check garbage cans and yards signaled that investigators believed the knife may have been discarded during the escape. Disposing of a weapon quickly after a crime is common, but finding it can be extraordinarily difficult. If thrown into a residential trash bin before collection, it could travel miles to a landfill within hours. Still, law enforcement often tries. Garbage routes are tracked, Pickup times are logged. Landfill zones are mapped. Even a slim chance of recovery can be worth pursuing. Meanwhile, the legal case began to take shape. Prosecutors didn't charge Ryan Dodd with only murder. They charged him with home invasion, armed violence, residential burglary, and aggravated stalking. Each charge served a purpose. Home invasion and residential burglary addressed unlawful entry into the garage and home. Armed violence accounted for the alleged use of a knife. Aggravated stalking elevated the case from a single violent act to a pattern of behavior leading up to the killing. Together, these charges painted a narrative, not of a sudden confrontation, but of escalation. From a legal standpoint, stacking charges also protects the prosecution. Even if a jury struggles with one element, others may still stand. It also reflects the full scope of alleged harm, not just the final act. For the defense, the strategy would be different. Defense attorneys would likely focus on challenging identification, intent, and timeline. Was the man in the bushes definitively Ryan Dodd? Could the surveillance footage be misinterpreted? Did the earlier clubhouse incident truly connect to the murder? Or was it coincidence? They would also examine the arrest itself. Dodd did not flee at high speed. He did not resist. He complied with officers. Defense attorneys often argue that such behavior is inconsistent with consciousness of guilt. Prosecutors, however, may counter that calm after violence doesn't negate responsibility. It may simply reflect calculation or shock. Another key issue would be motive. Publicly, few details about the divorce or post-divorce relationship between Ashley Stewart and Ryan Dodd have been released. But investigators would examine court records, messages, emails, and third-party statements to determine whether there were signs of obsession, control, or resentment. Stalking cases often reveal themselves quietly, through repeated appearances, unexplained encounters, or subtle monitoring that only becomes obvious after tragedy strikes. Friends and family may have noticed patterns in hindsight. Victims sometimes minimize or normalize concerning behavior, especially when the person involved is a former partner. If evidence emerges showing repeated contact, unwanted presence, or tracking behavior, it could solidify the aggravated stalking charge. As the case moved forward, Ashley Stewart's community began grieving publicly. Friends described her as a beacon of light, a devoted mother, and someone who brought warmth into every space she entered. Vigils were held. A GoFundMe was created to support her children and family. For them, the legal process felt distant compared to the permanence of their loss. For investigators and attorneys, however, the process was just beginning. Evidence would be reviewed, motions filed, and hearings scheduled. Defense teams would demand full discovery. Prosecutors would prepare to justify every charge beyond a reasonable doubt. And at the center of it all remained one haunting image: a husband watching his home security camera, helpless, as a man ran into the garage behind his wife. As the case moved deeper into the legal system, the focus shifted from what happened to how it would be proven. In court, emotion alone is never enough. Every moment, every image, every assumption must be translated into evidence that can survive scrutiny. At the center of the prosecution's case would be intent. Not just whether Ashley Stewart was killed, but whether the killing was planned. Phones run out of battery. It's not enough to show possibility. Prosecutors must show probability. The home security footage would also be critical. The husband's testimony establishes recognition. He knows his wife's ex-husband. He recognizes his build, his gait, his movement. In court, that familiarity carries weight. Yet defense attorneys may push back. Lighting, camera angles, resolution. The fact that the footage doesn't show the actual attack, they may argue misidentification. Jurors would be tasked with deciding whether recognition from a live feed is reliable under stress. Watching your wife followed into a garage is not a neutral observation. It's an emotional moment. Defense teams may argue that emotion clouds perception. Prosecutors, however, would likely counter that recognition isn't diminished by fear, it's sharpened by it. The issue of the missing weapon looms large. While murder convictions do not require the weapon to be recovered, its absence creates space for doubt. Defense attorneys may suggest alternative explanations for the injuries or challenge assumptions about how the wounds were inflicted. But prosecutors would rely on the medical examiner's findings. Sharp force injuries tell a clear story. The type, depth, and pattern of wounds can indicate the weapon's characteristics even if the weapon itself is gone. In many cases, juries accept forensic conclusions even without physical recovery. Another element jurors may consider is post-crime behavior. Ryan Dodd did not flee the state. He did not lead police on a chase. He was driving calmly when stopped. He complied. Defense attorneys often highlight such behavior to argue lack of consciousness of guilt. Prosecutors, on the other hand, may argue that calm behavior can be a sign of calculation or shock or belief that escape is unnecessary. Neither interpretation is definitive. That's where context matters. If prosecutors can show evidence of stalking, waiting, or planning, Calmness afterward may look less like innocence and more like control. Aggravated stalking is not an easy charge to prove. It requires showing repeated behavior that causes fear or distress. Sometimes victims don't report stalking until it escalates. Sometimes they normalize it. Sometimes they tell friends instead of police. If investigators uncover messages from Ashley expressing concern, unease, or fear about her ex-husband's presence, those messages could become powerful evidence. Even third-party testimony matters. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, anyone who noticed patterns, unexpected appearances, or changes in behavior. Stalking cases are often built backward. Only after violence occurs do patterns become visible. For Ashley's family, this legal analysis offers little comfort. The process is slow. Hearings, motions, delays, it can take months or years before a case reaches trial. But every step matters. Defense teams will request full discovery. They will file motions to suppress evidence if they believe searches were improper or data was collected unlawfully. Judges will weigh those arguments carefully. Prosecutors must ensure every piece of evidence was obtained legally. One misstep can weaken an otherwise strong case. Meanwhile, Ashley's children grow up without their mother. That reality hangs over everything. The legal system moves deliberately, but loss is instant. In court, jurors will not just hear facts, they will see images, hear recordings, watch footage. They will be asked to decide whether the story told by prosecutors is more believable than the alternative suggested by the defense. They will weigh silence against action, presence against denial, patterns against coincidence, and they will decide whether the evidence shows a moment of uncontrollable violence or the end of a path that began long before that garage door opened. The outcome of the case will rest not on a single image or moment, but on how those moments connect. As the case moves forward, the question no longer centers on what happened inside the garage, but on what justice can realistically look like after such an irreversible loss. Courts are designed to weigh evidence, not grief. And yet in cases like this, the two become inseparable. If convicted, Ryan Dodd faces the most severe consequences Illinois law allows. First-degree murder alone carries the possibility of decades in prison, potentially life. The additional charges, home invasion, armed violence, residential burglary, and aggravated stalking, are not symbolic. They reflect the prosecution's belief that this was not a single moment of violence, but the culmination of deliberate actions that unfolded over time. Sentencing, if it comes, would not be about a single act. It would be about the narrative a jury accepts, whether this was a spontaneous confrontation or a planned intrusion fueled by fixation and control. Judges often consider aggravating factors: waiting near the home, entering without consent, the use of a weapon, the vulnerability of the victim, the presence of children who will now grow up without their mother. These are the details that shift a sentence from severe to maximum. At the same time, the defense will continue doing what the law entitles them to do, testing every assumption, questioning every inference, and reminding the court that certainty must be proven, not presumed. That tension is the core of the justice system. Outside the courtroom, Ashley Stewart's name has already taken on meaning beyond the case file. Friends describe her as someone who made others feel safe, seen, and valued. A mother of 6 whose life revolved around her children. A woman whose presence was steady, ordinary, and deeply loved. Those details may never appear in jury instructions, but they matter. They matter because this case is not just about a man accused of murder. It's about how easily familiarity can become vulnerability, how technology meant to protect can become the final witness, and how violence does not always announce itself loudly. It can wait quietly, patiently, until it finds an opening. For Ashley's husband, the memory that will never fade is not the courtroom or the charges. It's the image on a phone screen, a routine moment turning catastrophic, the knowledge that he saw it coming but could not stop it. That kind of trauma does not end with an arrest. Communities often search for meaning after tragedies like this. People ask what signs were missed, what could have been done differently, whether anything could have changed the outcome. Those questions rarely have satisfying answers. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. Some acts are not preventable in the moment they occur, but they may be understood afterward. This case underscores the role of stalking laws, surveillance evidence, and digital footprints in modern prosecutions. It also highlights how former relationships, especially those marked by unresolved conflict, can remain dangerous long after they officially end. The law does not punish thought, it punishes action. And in this case, prosecutors believe the actions tell a clear story. As motions are filed and hearings scheduled, the pace will slow. News coverage will quiet. But for those closest to Ashley Stewart, time will not soften what happened. It will only widen the space she once filled. The court's eventual verdict will carry legal weight. It will determine guilt or innocence, sentence or acquittal, but it cannot restore what was lost. What it can do at its best is affirm that a life mattered, that actions have consequences, and that waiting in the shadows does not escape accountability. In quiet neighborhoods across the country,